the archivist of Samarkand. Night had a particular way of arriving in Samarkand. It did not fall suddenly like a curtain dropped from the sky. It seeped in gently, slipping over domes and minarets, gliding across tiled courtyards and narrow alleys, softening every line of the ancient city until everything seemed drawn in charcoal and indigo. Lanterns were lit one by one, their warm halos floating in the dark like small, slow-moving stars. By the time the last call to prayer faded into the evening air, the crowds had thinned from the great square of the Registan. Merchants covered their stalls. Apprentices swept the last traces of dust from doorways, and the chatter of the day slowly dissolved into a hum as people retreated indoors. Yet, behind one set of heavy wooden doors, light remained. Came from the library. The library was not the grandest building in Samarkand. From the square, it looked modest beside the towering facades of the madrasas, their turquoise tiles catching every stray glimmer of sun or moon. But for those who knew it, the library was the quiet heart of the city. Its walls held not treasure of gold or silk, but something weightless and powerful. Words, drawn carefully onto paper, parchment, and leather, saved across generations. Long ago, the keeper of this library had been a man named Hafiz al-Javari, though the students rarely called him by that full name. To them, he was simply the archivist. He had arrived in Samarkand as a young man with ink-stained fingers and a satchel full of copied texts. Over the years, he became as much a fixture of the library as the shelves themselves. He walked with a quiet step that barely disturbed the dust on the floor. He knew every manuscript by touch, by scent, by the faint pattern of its calligraphy. He could find a lost treatise in the dark, just by remembering where his hand had last settled on the wood. He never married, never sought a post in court, never traveled far beyond the city walls. His whole life was a path traced between shelves, between tables, between the window where morning light fell and the corner where the lanterns were kept. To some, this might have seemed small. To Hafiz, it was a universe. It was said that he died in the same way he had lived. Quietly, with a book open before him and ink still drying on the nib of his pen. One winter night, the students left him alone at a long wooden table, bent over a commentary on medicine. When they returned at dawn, he was still seated, head tilted as if in thought. His body was still and cooling, yet the lantern beside him burned steadily, its flame undisturbed. They buried him on a hill where the city stone met the open sky, and for a time the library felt heavier without him. Students stepped more carefully, spoke more softly, as though afraid to disturb a silence that now belonged to someone who should have been turning pages beside them. Then, little by little, they realized the silence was not empty. The first to notice was a boy named Marwan. He had come to Samarkand from a distant village, carrying little more than determination and a letter from a minor teacher who believed in him. The city overwhelmed him at first. The size of the square, the sparkle of glazed tiles, the weight of centuries pressing down like a second sky. But the library felt different. It smelled of leather, dust, and lamp oil, felt contained, gentle, like stepping into the inside of a thought. One evening, Marwan stayed later than he intended. He had been copying a geometry text, its diagrams drawn as carefully as a jeweler's lines on metal. The daylight had faded unnoticed. He looked up only when his hand began to cramp and realized that most of the students had already gone. The librarian's apprentice extinguished one lantern after another, wishing him good night and urging him not to stay too long. Marwan promised he would leave soon. The door closed with a slow, muffled thud. Footsteps retreated down the corridor. The echo died away. The room fell quiet. Marwan dipped his pen in ink one last time. The letters on the page blurred slightly as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. He blinked, lifted the pen to shake off the excess ink, and heard it. A sound like a soft exhale. Then the faintest rustle, as if someone had touched a shelf with the back of their hand. He turned his head. No one stood between the aisles of books, yet something had changed in the room. The air felt attentive, as though the library itself had begun listening. Marwan swallowed. "Who is there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer. only the slow, steady glow of a lantern mounted on the far wall. He almost laughed at himself. "I've been reading too long," he muttered, turning back to his work. But when he looked down, his hand stilled. The margin beside his last line of text was filled. Not by his own writing, not in his own hand. Someone, something, had completed the sentence he had left unfinished in the same style of script with the same steady spacing. Only the letters were cleaner, more refined, as if written by someone who had been practicing for a lifetime. Marwan's heart beat a little faster. The ink was still glistening, fresh. He looked again around the room. The shelves stood where they always had. Shadows lay in familiar corners. And yet, he did not feel afraid. If anything, he felt accompanied. Carefully, he rose from his seat and walked between the shelves, running his fingers along the wooden edges. He reached the section where the geometry scroll had come from. As his hand brushed against one particular volume, a cool sensation spread through his fingertips, the opposite of the lantern's warmth, yet not unpleasant. More like touching stone that had been kept in shade. "Thank you," he murmured, feeling foolish, yet compelled to say it anyway. The silence deepened, wrapping around him like a cloak. From that night on, small things began to happen in the library. Books that students needed would be found already laid out on tables when they arrived, open to the exact page they sought. A missing sheet would appear tucked into a different volume, as though someone had quietly corrected a misplacement in the night. Ink pots never ran completely dry when someone was truly absorbed in their work. Lamps flickered but did not go out, even when the oil should have been nearly spent. The younger students whispered among themselves. They spoke of Hafiz al-Javari walking the aisles long after his body had left the earth, of his hand guiding theirs when they struggled with a line of script or the logic of a proof. The older scholars smiled and shook their heads, unwilling to say what they believed, yet unwilling, too, to dismiss the stories outright. Elise, a visiting scholar from far away, arrived expecting nothing more supernatural than a long list of catalogued manuscripts. She had heard of Samarkand's beauty, of course, and of its role along the Silk Road, where ideas traveled as easily as goods. But tales of spirits had not reached her ears. Her first night in the library changed that. She sat near a window where the moonlight spilled onto the floor in a pale, rectangular pool. The lantern at her table cast a circle of amber around her work. Outside, the city quieted piece by piece, voices fading, footsteps softening, doors closing like breaths released at the end of a long day. Inside, she poured all her attention into a fragile manuscript filled with notes on the movements of planets. The script was dense and old, in a hand that leaned forward as though eager to keep speaking. But in many places the ink had faded beyond recognition. She sighed at one particularly faint passage and leaned back, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "If only I could see what you meant," she whispered, half to herself, half to the long-gone author of the text. The lantern flickered, not sharply, not with the sudden gust of a draft. It brightened, just a little, as if someone had cupped a hand gently around the flame to protect it. The shadows on the shelves shifted almost imperceptibly, stretching in one direction, contracting in another. Elise sat very still. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw a shape at the end of the aisle, a suggestion of movement more than a figure. It was like seeing the idea of a person rather than the person themselves. An outline where robes might fall, a slight bend where shoulders might stoop, a tilt of something that could have been a head bowed over text. When she turned her head to look directly, there was nothing there. Only the shelves, the books, the play of light. Yet, when she glanced back down, the faded line on the page had somehow become clearer. Not new, not rewritten, but as though her eyes had suddenly learned how to read its faintest strokes. It happened again the next night and the next. Each time she lost her way in the text, something in the room shifted, light bending, air warming, the softest whisper of paper moving on a distant table. Each time, the answer she needed emerged, not as a miracle, but as if she herself had finally noticed what was already there. Later, when she wrote about her research, she did not mention spirits. She only wrote, in one small footnote, that the atmosphere of the library seemed unusually conducive to understanding, as though one were never entirely working alone. The people of Samarkand smiled when they read that line. They knew. They had felt the same. To them, the archivist was no figure of dread. He was a companion in study, a presence woven into the very grain of the wooden shelves and the wrinkles of old paper. He did not slam doors or whisper threats from dark corners. He did not appear in mirrors or send shivers down spines. He moved in subtler ways. A feather-light step on stone. A book placed exactly where it was needed. A lamp that stayed burning just long enough for one more paragraph, one more insight, one more line. Some said that, late at night, if you stayed very still and allowed your thoughts to quiet, you might hear another sound layered beneath your own breathing. The faint scratch of a pen moving across a page in a hand that had never quite forgotten its work. And if you happened to speak into that stillness, to ask the room for guidance, you might feel the air grow fractionally warmer, as though someone had come to stand nearby, leaning over your shoulder the way a kind teacher might, not to correct you harshly, but to reassure you that you were close. In a city once known as the crossroads of the world, where caravans had brought silk, spices, and stories from every direction, the archivist remained like a quiet star at the center, a constant, gentle presence among the ever-turning heavens of human thought. He did not ask to be seen. He did not need his name remembered. It was enough that the library lived on, that the books still breathed, that young hands still turned pages with care. And so, long after his body had turned to dust on the hillside, long after the city had changed and changed again, those who chose to sit late among the shelves sometimes found that they were not entirely alone. In the soft glow of lantern light, with the night pressing gently at the windows and the hum of the city gone quiet outside, a sense of calm company would settle over them, as if an old friend, who had never quite stopped working, had pulled up a chair in the dark to keep them quietly, peacefully, thoughtfully awake, until, at last, sleep arrived like the closing of a well-loved book. The lantern maker of Granada. Granada had always been a city that shimmered with two kinds of light. The first belonged to the sun, the fierce, golden radiance that poured over the Alhambra's red walls each morning, turning its towers into glowing embers. The second belonged to people, their lanterns, candles, hearths, and soft evening lamps that transformed the narrow Albaicin streets into ribbons of amber as night crept in. But there was another kind of light that the locals whispered about. A light that did not flicker. A light that did not dim. A light that did not need oil or flame. They called it Luz del Viejo Farolero, the light of the old lantern maker. To most, it was just a story carried on evening breezes. To a few, it was a presence, gentle, guiding, and impossibly steady, that walked the old quarters long after real lantern makers had closed their shops. The story begins centuries ago, when Granada was a crossroads of cultures, ideas, and artisan guilds. In the Albaicin district lived an elderly craftsman named Mateo del Cabra, known for working with copper so thin and delicate it hummed when touched. His lanterns were unlike any others in the city. They did not simply hold light, they shaped it. Mateo believed that light had personality. Some lanterns produced warmth. Some produced clarity. Some offered comfort to the lonely, while others whispered stories to those who walked alone at night. He spent his life refining this belief until every lantern he created was a small miracle. Travelers climbing the steep Albaicin steps would often see Mateo sitting cross-legged outside his workshop, tapping copper into curves that looked almost alive, cutting glass panels that caught the twilight and fractured it into tiny rainbows. Children gathered around him because he would let them choose pieces of colored glass, holding them up to the sky and saying, "Light always tells a story. You must choose the one that speaks to you." But no lantern was as special as the one Mateo kept inside his shop, the Farol Azul, the blue lantern. It was said that the lantern glowed with a strange, serene light that never burnt the fingertips, never dimmed, and never cast harsh shadows. It was a light that softened every emotion, helped wandering thoughts settle, and guided lost hearts home. Mateo had made it for someone he loved long ago, but that is a part of the legend that changed with each retelling. Some said it was for a child he lost, others for a wife taken by illness, and some insisted it was simply a piece of his soul molded into form. All versions agree on one thing: The blue lantern radiated peace so profound that even a grieving man could sleep beside it. Mateo lived a long life, and when he passed, it happened gently. He died seated at his workbench, his tools neatly arranged, the blue lantern glowing beside him, brighter than it ever had in all his years. After his death, the workshop should have fallen silent. But it didn't. The first sign came from a young woman named Isabella, who lived across the narrow street. She swore that she saw a soft blue glow in the shop's window long after the doors had been locked for the night. The glow would move slowly, drifting from table to shelf, then hovering near the door as if someone inside was walking with it. Isabella told her mother, who brushed it off as moonlight. But the moon, Isabella insisted, did not move like a lantern in a steady hand. Not long after, a boy named Teo, who often helped Mateo polish copper scrap, wandered near the shuttered workshop during a misty evening. He heard the gentle tapping sound of metal being shaped, not the loud, hammering strikes of a smith, but the rhythmic, soft taps Mateo used when forming lantern curves. Teo pressed his ear against the wood. Tap, 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 then silence. Then a warm glow beneath the crack of the door. The boy did not run. He smiled. "Maestro," he whispered, "are you still working?" The glow brightened once, then faded. From that night, more people began to notice the strange, comforting blue glimmer appearing in the Albaicin streets. On foggy nights, it floated low to the ground, making the cobblestones shimmer like polished marble. On festival evenings, it lingered among the other lanterns, softening their light, making the whole neighborhood feel calmer, as if breathing in unison. Unlike other ghost tales, this one held no shadow of fear. If anything, the blue lantern was a blessing. Fishermen returning home late said they saw it hovering on stairways, guiding their tired steps. Elderly women claimed it accompanied them when they walked alone, illuminating the uneven stones so they would not fall. Newlyweds believed it appeared near their windows on their first night together, offering silent congratulations. The Albaicin district developed a habit. When someone returned home late, they would leave a copper coin outside their door, not as payment, but as thanks for safe passage. Many mornings, the coins were gone. The gentle apparition eventually gained a shape or something close to it. A few people, always in the late hours when the city held its breath, described seeing a figure standing near Mateo's old workshop. It never looked solid, more like a shimmer, the outline of a man in soft blue light. It would appear only briefly, never staring, never approaching, always standing as though checking on the neighborhood. One elderly mason described it as the silhouette of a lantern maker examining his street. A poet visiting from Cadiz wrote that he saw a man carved from moonlight, leaning over a railing as if savoring the night. But the closest description came from a quiet baker named Lucia, who woke unexpectedly one evening. The room was filled with a gentle glow, like starlight floating behind glass. She sat up, startled but not afraid. Beside her window stood a faint shape, barely there, a figure with slight shoulders, hands clasped as though holding an invisible lantern. The figure turned to her, not approaching, simply acknowledging her presence. Lucia felt warmth spread through her chest. Not heat, just comfort. A reminder of her father, of early mornings kneading dough at his side, of lanterns lit at dawn before the day began. When she blinked, the shape had faded. But her room remained bathed in the softest blue light until sunrise. Time moved on. The city changed. Streets were repaved. New lanterns replaced the old. Mateo's workshop became a ceramics shop, then a painter's studio, then an empty space waiting for something new. Yet the blue lantern never disappeared. In recent years, tourists wandering the Albaicin at night sometimes capture strange blue streaks in their photos. They assume it's a camera glitch, a strange reflection, a trick of the narrow streets. Locals do not correct them. The story is not something to explain. It is something to feel. Guides who lead nighttime tours know better than to bring the tale up casually. They wait for quiet moments, when the group stands overlooking the glowing city, when the Sierra Nevada mountains fade into shadow and the Alhambra sits in its eternal, soft red radiance. Only then do they speak of the lantern maker. Some spirits, They say, stay not because they are unfinished, but because they are unwilling to stop caring. And Granada, with its steep streets and heart-shaped lamps, seems the kind of place where a gentle soul might want to continue walking long after life has ended. One more story completes the legend. A modern traveler, an exhausted university student named Javier, visited Granada to escape the pressure of exams and city life. He wandered the Albayacin late into the night, overwhelmed by the quiet beauty of its labyrinthine paths. But as he climbed a particularly steep slope, he realized he had no idea how to return to his hostel. Panic began to rise. Then he saw it. A single blue light, floating just ahead. Not bright, not sharp. A lantern-sized glow, steady and inviting. It moved slowly, turning corners at a pace easy to follow. Javier, without thinking, followed it. Down one winding alley, across a small square, up two shallow steps, until finally the light paused in front of a wooden door. His hostel. He reached out, trembling, not from fear, but from relief, and the light flickered once, as though acknowledging him. Then it faded into the night. The next morning, Javier asked the hostel owner if there were still lantern makers in the area. The man smiled, stirring his tea. Only one, he said, and he hasn't been alive for more than 200 years. To this day, if you walk alone through the Albayacin after midnight, locals will tell you not to be afraid of the blue glow that sometimes rises around corners or lingers near stairways. They'll say the same sentence, always in a tone that mixes affection with certainty. That's just Mateo. He's making sure you don't walk in the dark. And when the light drifts away, moving slowly, peacefully, through the sleeping city, you might find yourself whispering thanks to a craftsman who never stopped shaping the night into something gentle. The silent guards of Petra. The desert surrounding Petra changes mood with the light. At dawn, the cliffs glow rose gold beneath the rising sun, like embers awakening from slumber. At midday, they blaze with a heat so intense that even shadows retreat, clinging tightly to the base of stone columns. But at night, Petra becomes something else entirely. The sandstone walls turn deep violet. The air cools, carrying the faint scent of dust and ancient minerals. Soft winds slip through carved facades and hallowed chambers, creating murmurs that drift across the canyon floors like half-remembered songs. And it is in this nighttime world that the people speak of them, the silent guards, not ghosts of sorrow, not guardians of treasure, but peaceful sentinels who have watched over Petra long before the last Nabatean caravan passed through its gates. Petra's history is carved into stone. Literally. The Nabateans, master stone carvers and desert navigators, hollowed entire structures from mountainsides. Temples, tombs, halls, and waterways. Everything shaped from sandstone as if sculpted by the earth itself. The city, tucked between desert wadis, once thrived with traders carrying frankincense, spices, textiles, and dyes. And as the city grew prosperous, so too did its protectors, the warriors who guarded its entrances and high places. But unlike ordinary soldiers, Petra's protectors were not remembered for their battles. They were remembered for their silence. Silent in posture, silent in watching, silent in spirit. When Petra declined and its people moved on, legends say the guardians stayed, not out of duty but out of peace, as if the stones they once defended adopted them in return. Long ago, a Nabatean captain named Rafik al-Kurim was charged with the protection of the Sikh, the narrow, winding passageway that leads into Petra. The Sikh is a place unlike any other, towering walls rising hundreds of feet, twisting in elegant, impossible lines. Travelers entering the canyon feel as though they are stepping into the inside of a sandstone wave. Even today, standing in the Sikh at dusk brings an odd stillness, as if time collapses and folds around you. Rafik was devoted to this place. He knew every crack, every ledge, every way sound traveled between the stone walls. He was patient, observant, and steady as the cliffs themselves. When he died, soldiers believed his spirit returned to the desert winds. But soon after, a trader described seeing a shadow in the Sikh at night. A tall figure standing perfectly still, watching the entrance with the posture of someone accustomed to long hours of quiet vigilance. The trader assumed it was a guard. It wasn't until he entered Petra and found the entire city silent, abandoned, and without patrol that he wondered who or what had been standing watch. Centuries later, explorers who rediscovered Petra in the 19th century wrote of strange sensations while passing through the sick. A British scholar named William Jardine recorded, "The canyon feels alive. I cannot explain it, but it was as though another set of footsteps walked beside mine. Never ahead, never behind, always beside." He insisted he had not imagined it. His guide, a Bedouin elder, responded with a small smile and simply said, "The guards walk with those who respect the stones." And so the story spread. The silent guards appear only to those who arrive at Petra with quiet hearts and steady breath. One of the most well-known modern encounters came from a Jordanian park ranger named Laith. He had been working in Petra for many years, often supervising the grounds at dusk when tourists left and the vast city returned to silence. One evening, he took his normal route through the sick. The air was unusually cool. The walls radiated a soft lavender hue under the fading sunlight. As he walked, he heard footsteps behind him, slow, even rhythmic. Laith turned, expecting to see a late hiker hurrying out. But there was no one. He resumed walking. Again, footsteps followed. He stopped. They stopped. He placed his palm against the sandstone wall, grounding himself. The rock was warm, holding onto the last of the day's heat. When he looked farther down the canyon, he saw a shape, tall, still, outlined faintly by ambient dusk. The figure stood with the relaxed, balanced posture of a warrior at rest. Not tense, not threatening, just observing. Laith didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply bowed his head slightly in respect. When he lifted his eyes, the figure had vanished. But a gentle breeze moved through the canyon, brushing past him like a hand on his shoulder. He finished his patrol with a sense of quiet reassurance. "I never felt in danger," Laith later said. "It was as if someone was walking me home." Petra's silent guards are not limited to the sick. Some say they appear on high ledges overlooking the treasury, its ornate facade framed by darkness. Others claim they have seen figures sitting at the edge of the royal tombs, legs dangling over cliffs with the ease of someone who spent their life patrolling those heights. A few hikers have reported feeling accompanied on the climb to the monastery, a long, winding path of worn steps carved into the mountain. They describe an inexplicable second breathing rhythm beside their own. Not heavy, not strained, just a calm cadence matching theirs. One tourist, a middle-aged schoolteacher named Evelyn, shared a story that captured the essence of Petra's guardians. She had been traveling alone, fulfilling a lifelong dream of seeing the ancient city. But the path to the monastery proved more challenging than she expected. Halfway up, her legs trembled with fatigue. She sat on a rock, fighting the urge to turn back. As she breathed slowly, feeling both defeated and disappointed, she sensed movement to her right. A figure sat quietly beside her. Tall, calm, gaze fixed ahead, not at her. It looked like a warrior carved from dusk itself. A gentle presence made of shadow and breath. The figure did not speak, but the silence it carried seemed to lend her strength. When Evelyn stood again, ready to continue, she felt lighter, supported, not alone. She reached the monastery with tears in her eyes and gratitude in her heart. "I don't think it was a ghost," she told her friends later. "I think Petra simply lends you company when you need it most." Locals say the silent guards serve a simple purpose: to witness, to guide, to remind travelers that Petra is still alive. Visitors often talk about feeling watched, not with scrutiny but with care, as if the city appreciates their presence and wants to escort them gently through its memory. There are no harsh energies in these stories, no restless spirits, no unfinished business, only guardianship. The silent guards walk because they choose to, because they loved the city that shaped them, because their devotion outlasted their footsteps. An anthropologist once asked a Bedouin guide why Petra held so many peaceful spirits when other ancient cities were filled with legends of angry phantoms and troubled ghosts. The guide thought for a moment, then said, Maybe anger belongs to the living. Petra has had centuries to learn silence. Those words captured something no academic study ever could. Those words captured something no academic study ever could. Petra, with its cliffs the color of dawn, its tombs carved from mountain hearts, and its paths smoothed by generations of sandaled feet, is a place where noise fades naturally. Even thoughts seem quieter there. Visitors often find themselves whispering without realizing it. And in that calm, in that suspended hush, it makes sense that spirits, if they remain, would take on the same softness. Today, if you walk the sick at twilight, when the canyon walls glow purple and the last echoes of the day fade into the stone, you may feel a subtle shift in the air, a footfall not your own, presence keeping pace with you, a gentle awareness resting just behind your shoulder. Not frightening, not cold, just steady, as though someone carved from sandstone and memory has stepped into stride beside you, honoring the oldest duty in the world, staying with those who walk alone. And when you turn the final corner and the treasury reveals itself, vast, silent, glowing faintly beneath the stars, you might feel an unseen companion pause with you, taking in the sight as if seeing it for the 1000th time and loving it still. Because the silent guards of Petra do not protect a city anymore. They protect a feeling, the feeling of arriving somewhere ancient and being welcomed anyway. The bridge watcher of Kyoto. Night in Kyoto has its own rhythm. It is softer than in other cities, less driven by traffic, less sharpened by neon. When evening settles over the old districts of Gion, Higashiyama, and Arashiyama, it feels like silk flowing slowly over rooftops, folding itself into the alleys, the riverbanks, and the gardens. Lanterns warm one by one, glowing like quiet promises in the dusk. The city's wooden bridges, some small, some centuries old, all gracefully arched, become silhouettes outlined by amber lamps and moonlit water. And if you stand quietly on one of those bridges after midnight, you might sense him. The locals call him Hashi no Morinin, the watcher of the bridge. A peaceful spirit, they insist. A gentle presence. A guardian not of people, but of stillness. He has been part of Kyoto's whispered lore for so long that no one remembers when the tale began. Some say he was once a monk. Others claim he was a poet. A few believe he was simply someone who loved the river too deeply to leave it behind. But all versions agree on one thing. He watches the bridges so no one must cross alone. Kyoto and its quiet spirits. Kyoto is a city where the physical and spiritual worlds overlap without conflict. Shrines whisper from moss-covered paths. Temples ring soft bells that drift beyond their walls. Old houses breathe with the memory of generations. Most ghosts in Kyoto's folklore are not frightening. They are reminders, echoes, companions of the night. The watcher belongs to this tradition. He is not a figure who startles travelers or creates sudden cold. Instead, he appears gently, a soft outline at the far end of a bridge, a glimmer of movement near the railings, a ripple in the air like a sigh of the river. The first recorded story. The oldest known written reference to the watcher shows up in an Edo period diary kept by a traveling calligrapher named Sachi Morimoto. She crossed Kyoto frequently, studying the aesthetics of old bridges and waterways. In her journal, she described an encounter that shaped the legend. At dusk, I crossed the wooden bridge near Shirakawa. I sensed someone walking behind me. When I turned, the bridge was empty. Yet the sound of footsteps continued, soft, deliberate, perfectly paced with mine. She did not feel fear. Instead, she wrote, "It was as though someone wished to accompany me, simply to offer company in the growing dark." Later that evening, as she returned across the same bridge, she felt a gentle warmth at her side, like the heat of a hand lantern, though she carried none. When she looked toward the railing, she saw it, faint shape, not fully formed, just the impression of robes swaying slightly in the breeze, a posture of relaxed presence. It stood facing the river, unmoving, as though deep in contemplation. Sachi bowed her head in respect. When she lifted her eyes again, the figure was gone. Who was the watcher? There are many theories. The monk theory. Some say he was a monk from centuries ago, one who dedicated his life to silent meditation by the river. He believed bridges were between-world places, thresholds where people carried burdens from one side to another. As a monk, he waited to ease their thoughts as they passed. The poet theory. Others claim he was an aspiring poet who often composed near the whispering waters. His verses, it is said, were always about transitions. Seasons changing, youth becoming old age, night turning into dawn. Bridges fascinated him. They symbolized movement between states, a modern encounter. One of the clearest contemporary accounts comes from a university student named Haruto. During exam season, he often walked late at night from his campus to his apartment in Higashiyama. His route crossed a small wooden bridge over the Shirakawa Canal, a serene stretch lined with willow trees whose branches trailed like green curtains over the water. One night, exhausted and carrying a heavy bag of books, Haruto trudged across the bridge. Halfway across, he felt pressure ease from his shoulders. Not physically, but emotionally. Like a sigh escaping his chest. He slowed. The water below reflected a soft, shimmering glow, though the lamps on the street were dim. Then he heard it. A second set of footsteps. Soft, measured, matching his pace. Haruto didn't turn immediately. Instead, he focused on the feeling. There was no chill, no fear, only companionship. When he finally glanced over his shoulder, he saw a faint shape at the start of the bridge. Not detailed, not human in clarity, just a suggestion like someone made of moonlight and air. The figure did not approach. It simply stood, as though ensuring Haruto reached the other side safely. When Haruto stepped onto the opposite bank, he turned back. The figure bowed slightly, just a tilt of brightness, then dissolved into the night. Haruto didn't tell many people, but he told enough that the story spread through the university's folklore group. Most students laughed when they first heard it, but a handful admitted that, during late-night study walks, they too had felt less alone while crossing the same bridge. The lantern ceremony. Every spring in Kyoto, during the annual nighttime lantern ceremony, people drift along the riverbanks placing small floating lanterns, Toro Nagashi, into the gentle currents. These lanterns, carrying the soft glow of remembrance, drift beneath bridges and past shrines, guiding memories toward the sea. For many years now, visitors claim the Watcher is most present during this festival. Not as a figure, but as something subtler. Light moves differently across certain bridges, softening, brightening, as though shaped by an unseen hand. Lanterns drifting below appear to pause, gathering in small clusters near the same railings where the Watcher has been seen. Some say the Watcher is honoring the lanterns. Others believe he ensures they do not get trapped in reeds or drift the wrong direction. Children often wave to the bridges as their lanterns float beneath, whispering, "Take care of our lights, okay?" Parents do not discourage them. Kyoto has room for these gentle beliefs. The Elder's Story. In a tiny tea house not far from Kumo River, an elderly woman named Michiko once shared her story with a group of visiting artists. Her voice was soft, a papery whisper, and her eyes clouded with age, but her memory of the moment was crystal clear. "When I was a girl," she began, "I loved to run across the bridge near our house. I always pretended I was a bird flying low over the river. One evening, as she played, she slipped on wet wood. Her foot skidded. Her body pitched forward toward the railing. But she never fell. She felt a firm hand, warm and steady, grasp her upper arm. When she straightened herself, she saw no one. But she felt someone. Presence. A calm reassurance that lingered like a slow breath. She ran home crying, not from fear, but from being overwhelmed by the strange gentleness of it all. Her grandmother listened to the story, then nodded calmly. "Ah," she said, "the Watcher helped you." It was explained so simply, as though the Watcher was an accepted truth of their family life. Michiko finished her tea and smiled at the artists. "He is not a ghost," she said. "He is a kindness. Why the Watcher remains." Spiritual scholars in Kyoto sometimes debate the Watcher's nature. But in all discussions, one idea persists. He remains because the bridges remain. Bridges in Kyoto are not just structures. They are thresholds between neighborhoods, between moments, between stages of life. People cross them when leaving home, when returning in sorrow, when seeking clarity, when beginning new chapters, when ending old ones. The watcher does not guard the living. He guards the transitions, because transitions, however gentle, are lonely, and no one, not even hundreds of years later, deserves to cross alone. The final tale. One rainy evening, a middle-aged traveler from New Zealand, Emma, found herself lost in Guyon's maze-like streets. The rain made the stone paths shimmer, blurring reflections of lanterns and rooftops. Her phone battery had died hours earlier. She had no map, no Japanese, no idea where her ryokan was located. As the drizzle turned into steady rain, she crossed a wooden footbridge spanning a narrow canal. Halfway across, she stopped to catch her breath. Then she saw it. A glow, not white, not yellow, but something in between. Gentle like candlelight filtered through shoji paper. It took the shape of a figure standing at the far end of the bridge, angled slightly toward her, like someone waiting patiently. Emma should have been startled. Instead, she felt something in her chest loosen, a tension she hadn't realized she held. Without a word, the figure turned and glided a few steps into a side path. Pausing, waiting, Emma hesitated only a moment before following. Every time she fell behind, the figure slowed. Every time she grew uncertain, the glow brightened. Finally, it led her to the entrance of a quiet ryokan, her ryokan. The figure paused, bowed its head, then faded as the rain softened to mist. When she told the story to the innkeeper the next morning, he listened without surprise. "You were helped," he said kindly. "Kyoto looks after its guests. The watcher today. In modern Kyoto, if you speak to those who walk its quiet streets at night, garden keepers, monks, late-shift workers, artists, students, many will tell you the same thing. There are nights when the bridges feel alive. Nights when shadows seem shaped with intention. Nights when the air feels guided. Not by fear, not by warning, but by presence. And if you ever cross a bridge and feel suddenly calmer, suddenly safer, suddenly accompanied, you may be sensing him. The watcher of the bridge. A guardian not of the past, but of every quiet step taken in the dark. The gentle specter of the Bosphorus lighthouse. The Bosphorus is not silent. Even at night, especially at night, it murmurs. Waves lap against stone quays. Fishing boats drift with wooden creeks. A far-off ferry hums softly as it cuts through moonlit currents. The strait inhales, exhales, and hums like a living thing, a ribbon of water dividing continents yet binding centuries. On its northern end, where the strait meets the restless Black Sea, stands a lighthouse known today simply as Ruzgar Fennery, the Wind Lighthouse. Perched on a cliff, its white tower has watched over sailors for more than 200 years. But the stories carried through Istanbul's tea houses and fishermen's gatherings speak of something else that watches there. Presence. Calm guardian. A spirit who never stopped tending the light. They call him the keeper of the north wind. And despite being a ghost story, nothing about him is frightening. A lighthouse between two worlds. The lighthouse was built during the late Ottoman period, under Sultan Mahmud II, when storms from the Black Sea wrecked ships attempting to enter the Bosphorus. Winter winds rolled in with a fury, erasing the horizon and swallowing small boats whole. To combat this, the empire appointed an experienced sailor named Ali Risad Effendi as the lighthouse's first keeper. A quiet man, Ali was known for two traits. 1. He loved the sea as if it were a dear friend. 2. He feared nothing more than letting sailors down. He lived in the lighthouse alone, accompanied only by a cat named Korup and his journals. His writing revealed a man who saw poetry in storms. One entry reads, "The wind tonight is loud, yes, but she sings. She asks only that I listen." Ali tended the lantern with meticulous devotion. On stormy nights, he paced the tower tirelessly. In calmer weather, he stood on the balcony, hands clasped behind his back, watching the water breathe. When Ali passed away, quietly in his sleep, his body was found in the keeper's chair facing the sea, a blanket on his lap and a faint smile resting on his lips. The lighthouse mourned in its own way. For several nights after his funeral, the lantern flickered strangely. It dimmed when it should have been strong, glowed when no flame was lit. Locals whispered that Ali's spirit had returned. But it returned gently, like a wind that touches your shoulder without disturbing your hair. The first encounter. The earliest known witness was a fisherman named Yilmaz, a man whose hands were as rough as the ropes he worked with. He sailed out one foggy night, chasing a stubborn school of fish he swore he could still hear beneath the water. But the fog thickened. The compass needle shook. The sea began to swell with unpredictable mood. Yilmaz lost sight of everything: shore, stars, even the sound of other boats. His engine sputtered, and fear began to creep into his chest, slow but certain. Then he saw it. The lighthouse glowed with unexpected brilliance. Not the normal steady beam, but a soft, blue-white radiance that spread across the water like a blanket. At its base, near the balcony, stood a figure, a tall silhouette, shoulders relaxed, posture patient. A lantern, though no lantern existed there, hung from his hand, burning with quiet clarity. The figure did not wave or call out. Instead, it turned slowly and began walking around the lighthouse balcony. The beam followed his motion, or perhaps his presence became the beam. Guided by this impossible glow, Yilmaz steered toward shore, reaching safety just as the fog dissolved like breath on cold glass. When he told the story later, he said, "It wasn't a ghost. It was help." From that day on, the legend was sealed. A protector, not a haunting. Many ghost tales warn of cold air, sudden dread, or items moved with malicious intent. The keeper of the north wind is nothing like these. He is a presence of warmth, not chill, guidance, not mischief, companionship, not loneliness. Sailors claim that when the spirit is near, ropes untangle more easily, lights appear brighter, and the sea seems less hostile, as if the wind itself hesitates to harm those under his watch. Even the lighthouse staff reports small kindnesses. A lantern they forgot to clean shines as if polished. A door left open swings shut quietly, never slamming. A book falls from a shelf but lands upright. The kettle boils exactly when someone reaches for it. These things can be dismissed as coincidence. But longtime keepers know better. The woman who walked the cliff path. One of the most well-known encounters happened to a woman named Selin, a literature professor from Istanbul who often walked near the lighthouse to clear her mind. One evening, she decided to take her walk later than usual. The air tasted of impending rain, and the clouds hung low like folded blankets. Selin loved this kind of weather. It reminded her of the gray seas she read about in old novels. As she climbed the cliff path, she slipped on damp stones. Her ankle twisted, and she stumbled forward with a gasp. Before she hit the ground, she felt something, a strong, steady arm around her back. Firm enough to stop her fall, gentle enough to reassure her. The sensation lasted only a second. When she steadied herself, she turned around instinctively. No one was there, but the path ahead, previously dim, glowed faintly with a bluish hue, just bright enough for safe footing. Selin continued slowly. When she reached the lighthouse, the glow faded. She told no one at first, but later confided to a friend. Whatever caught me felt like a guardian. Not a ghost. A guardian. The keeper who reads. Another curious detail appears often in stories. The smell of old books and warm oil inside the lighthouse, even when the lanterns haven't been lit. Ali Resad was known for being an avid reader. His journals mention him devouring works on astronomy, navigation, poetry, and Ottoman philosophy. The keepers who came after him swear that during night shifts, they sometimes hear the rustle of pages turning in the empty reading room. One modern keeper described it perfectly. It sounds like someone is reading slowly, carefully, savoring each sentence. Books left open on tables are often found closed, marked neatly with a scrap of paper, never lost or misplaced. A cup left half full of tea is sometimes discovered warm again, despite hours passing. These things don't frighten the keepers. They comfort them, It feels like Ali is still there, tending the lighthouse, maintaining order, respecting the rhythm of the night. The lighthouse that never sleeps. On stormy nights, especially in winter, the lighthouse sometimes shines brighter than the modern bulbs should allow. Pilots navigating the Bosphorus shipping lane report a second light. Not the mechanical beacon, but a companion glow lower on the tower, like the shape of a man holding a lantern as he circles the balcony. The glow moves with purpose. Slow, even, reassuring. It never breaks pattern, never flickers with fear. Some captains swear the beam accompanies them far beyond the lighthouse's physical reach, illuminating waves farther out than any lamp possibly could. One Russian tanker captain described it as a glow that made the sea stop growling. There is no scientific explanation, but there doesn't need to be one. A child's memory. The softest, most touching story involves a boy named Murat, who grew up in a small fishing family. On nights his father returned late, Murat would sit on the rocks, watching for the boat's lantern. One foggy night, the sea swallowed every light, except one. A bluish glow began to shimmer above the waves. Murat stood, heart hammering, recognizing it not as a ship's lamp, but something floating, moving with tranquil intention. It drifted toward the harbor, and behind it, a small fishing boat emerged, guided safely home. When Murat's father docked, he was pale. "A man walked the water with a lamp," he said, "but he never sank." Murat did not ask further questions. He only looked at the lighthouse and whispered, "Thank you." Why the keeper remains. Spiritual historians suggest the keeper's presence is rooted not in unfinished business, but in continued purpose. Ali Resad loved the sea. He loved guiding others through it, and he never stopped. Even after life ended, devotion endured, transforming into something pure, something calm, something unburdened by fear or regret. He is not stuck. He is not trapped. He is choosing to stay, choosing to watch over ships, choosing to hold the light when storms threaten, choosing to place a steady hand on the shoulder of anyone who feels unmoored. The last story. A few years ago, a photographer working on a book about lighthouses stayed overnight at Rusgar Fennery. Around midnight, he walked out onto the balcony, hoping to capture long exposure shots of the strait. The wind was strong, but not harsh, like a breath trying to say something. He set his camera up. Just as he pressed the shutter, the wind stilled. A warm presence stood beside him, not touching, simply accompanying. The photographer froze, breath thinning into quiet. Then he saw it in the reflective glare of his camera lens. A faint silhouette standing where he stood, slightly taller, posture easier, lantern raised as though posing for the photo. He looked up from the camera. The balcony was empty, but in that moment of stillness, he whispered, "Do you want me to take the picture?" The wind stirred, warmer than before. He did. Later, when he developed the image, he found no figure. Only a soft halo of blue-white light above the rail. He kept that photo on his desk for the rest of his life. Because even though the figure wasn't visible, the peace in the picture was undeniable. To this day, fishermen, travelers, lighthouse keepers, pilots, and wanderers speak of the gentle spirit at the edge of the Bosphorus. When the fog thickens and the waves deepen, and a soft blue glow appears around the lighthouse balcony, locals say, "Oh, Ali is awake tonight," and no one fears, no one hides, no one whispers nervously. Instead, they smile, because some spirits do not haunt the night, they guide it. The violinist of Vienna's empty concert hall. Vienna has grown used to music. It lives in the city the way air does, invisibly, constantly, without beginning or end. In the mornings, sound comes from open conservatory windows, pianos spilling scales into the streets. At midday, tourists hum melodies they half remember as they cross grand squares. By evening, chandeliers rise over velvet seats, and orchestras tune under domed ceilings, drawing the night in around them like a cloak. But the story of the violinist does not belong to the bright evenings of applause. It belongs to what comes after, to the hours when the audiences go home, when the stage lights go dark, And when a concert hall designed for 1,000 ears is left with none at all, that is when, sometimes very late, someone begins to play. A hall that remembers. In the heart of Vienna stands an old concert hall. Not the largest, not the most photographed, but beloved by those who frequent it. Its walls are a deep, burnished gold. Its seats are upholstered in red fabric worn smooth by decades of use. Above the stage, a painted ceiling shows clouds and angels frozen mid-flight, as though they stopped to listen. The hall is not famous worldwide. It does not have the scale of the grandest venues. But it has something else, memory. For over a century, it has heard everything. From symphonies that shook its foundations to lullaby-like encores performed quietly, just because the conductor did not want to leave the stage yet. It has felt the vibrations of cellos pressed into its wooden floor, the brush of footsteps across its stage, the warmth of orchestras breathing in sync. And among all the musicians who played there, one stands out in whispered recollection. A violinist named Elena Weiss. She was not a global sensation. She did not die tragically mid-performance. Her story is smaller, gentler than that. But sometimes the softest stories leave the deepest echoes. Elena, who stayed after everyone left. Elena grew up in a modest apartment a few tram stops away from the hall. As a child, she would press her ear against the building's stairwell wall whenever someone upstairs practiced an instrument. She could not see the players, but she could feel the music as tiny vibrations through plaster and brick. Her first violin was secondhand. Its varnish was chipped, its case frayed at the corners. She loved it more than any perfect, polished thing she could have owned. Her teachers said she had two unusual qualities for a young musician. She listened more than she spoke. She cared less about being seen and more about making the room itself feel at ease. In her 20s, she began performing in the small Vienna hall, not always as a soloist, sometimes just as a section player in the second violins. She didn't mind. It was enough to sit in the middle of so much sound. After concerts, when the audience left and the rest of the orchestra drifted away into the bright corridors, Elena often lingered. She would stay behind on the empty stage, violin resting gently under her chin, fingers relaxed on the fingerboard. The hall, which moments before had been full of coughs, applause, shifting bodies and rustling programs, would become very quiet. Elena loved that moment. She believed the hall needed one last song after everyone left. A kind of good night, so she'd play something small, a fragment, a lullaby, a slow, wandering melody of her own, shaped not for any person but for the building itself. If anyone had listened closely from the doorway, they might have heard it as a simple line of notes, unhurried, introspective, like a conversation held just above a whisper. Then she would pack her violin away, touch the side wall with a grateful hand, and leave. She did this for years, long enough that the hall, in its own quiet way, began to expect it. The night she didn't come back. Time moves even for those who seem made for timeless things. Elena grew older. Her hands developed the slightest tremor. Her hearing dulled at the edges, not enough to disrupt, just enough to make her tilt her head more carefully toward sound. One winter, she grew ill, the kind of illness that keeps one at home and makes even a short tram ride feel like crossing an ocean. The hall went on without her, of course. Other violinists filled her chair. Other hands gripped the bow. But on the first evening when she would have stayed late, the stage was empty. No solo melody rocked the air after the last encore. No final song wrapped itself around the beams. The lights were turned off. The doors were locked. The hall sat in its own dark, listening to nothing but heating pipes and the faint groan of settling wood. Elena died on a quiet afternoon, with a half-written melody in her notebook and her violin resting in its open case by the window. It was the kind of passing that leaves no sensational story, only a gentle absence. Yet, a week later in the concert hall something began. A tune with no visible player. The first person to notice was a stagehand named Lucas. He had worked at the hall for decades, moving chairs, adjusting stands, checking cables, making sure bottles of water did not roll under the percussion section. One night, after a rehearsal, he stayed late to fix a loose floor panel near the conductor's podium. The orchestra had left. The cleaning staff had finished. He was alone under the dim glow of the single bulb they always left on above the stage. As he knelt with his toolbox open, he heard it. A note, just one at first. Clear, sustained, floating out into a space that should have been entirely still. He froze, hand hovering above a screwdriver. Then came another note connected to the first. Not a random sound, a phrase. Then another. He knew instantly that it was a violin. But there were no musicians in sight. The music was soft, played as though the bow barely touched the strings. It wandered, not a recognizable piece, not a famous concerto, but something simple, personal. No vibrato for show, only pure tone. Lucas straightened slowly, heart beating faster, yet not from fear. The sound itself carried no tension, felt more like a sigh than a statement. "Hello?" he called, though his instinct told him the answer would not be spoken in words. The tune continued, rising gently, then falling, circling 2 or 3 tender motifs as though testing how they resonated in the old wood. Lucas walked across the stage, each step making the boards creak. The music neither faltered nor moved away. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When he reached center stage, right where the conductor stood in performances, the notes seemed to wrap around him. Each one settled like a feather on his shoulders. The melody lingered for a final phrase, hovering on a high, pure note that hung in the air longer than it should have. Then it faded. The hall returned to silence. Later, Lucas would search backstage. Everything was locked. No cases, no players, no stray instruments forgotten on chairs. Only the faint echo of that song stayed with him. He did not share the story widely. But the next night, he stayed behind on purpose. Just in case. The melody returns. The same tune reappeared on a handful of nights. Always after everyone had gone. Always when the stage was empty. Always quiet, as if not wanting to disturb anyone who might be resting nearby. A few others heard it, too. A janitor mopping the corridor doors left slightly ajar. A sound engineer checking cables for a recording session the next morning. A young usher who had forgotten her scarf and returned to fetch it, only to stop in the aisle, head tilted, listening. None of them felt threatened. There was no chill on the skin, no prickling at the back of the neck. Only a sense of stepping into something already in progress, like walking into a room where someone hums to themselves while tidying up. Eventually, the staff began referring to the presence simply as her. "Did you hear her last night? She played again after the rehearsal. Must have been a good concert." She sounded particularly happy. No one needed to clarify who she was. They all felt as if they knew. The violinist, Elena, who stayed behind after others had left, now doing the same thing in a more literal sense. Not a haunting, a habit. What makes the violinist's story different from other ghost tales is that nothing in it feels like punishment or restlessness. She is not knocking bows from stands, slamming lids on pianos, appearing in mirrors, or repeating a tragic final piece. Instead, she seems to be continuing a habit, the gentle ritual of gifting the hall one last melody. Some nights, the tune is brighter, with small leaps of joy in it. Other nights, it is slower, almost like a lullaby sung from the far side of sleep. A sound engineer once decided to be clever. He left a recording device running overnight on the stage, hoping to catch the mysterious music. When he listened back the next morning, he heard only faint creaks, soft humming of the ventilation, and a whisper of tone so airy, he couldn't be sure it wasn't the building itself. It was as though the hall refused to let her be reduced to data. She is not a sample. She is a presence, best felt in the moment, not captured. The young violinist. Years after Elena's passing, a young violinist named Anna Weiss joined the orchestra that played in the hall. She shared a last name with Elena, though they were only distantly related, connected through branches of extended family. Still, stories of the great-aunt who loved the stage more than the spotlight reached her through grandmotherly anecdotes and worn photographs. On the first evening Anna performed in the hall, she felt a surprising calm. Most young musicians trembled under the high balcony lights and ornate ceiling, but Anna felt as though she were entering a familiar room. The concert went well. The audience applauded. The orchestra bowed. The conductor smiled warmly. Afterward, as colleagues laughed backstage, gathering coats and cases, Anna drifted back out onto the empty stage alone. Her violin was still in her hand. She didn't entirely know why she'd returned, only that she wasn't ready to leave yet. She walked to the center and looked up at the painted ceiling, angels frozen mid-listen. The silence was deep but not heavy. On a quiet impulse, she lifted her violin and played. Not from the evening program, but something that had come to her in small fragments over the last few days. A melody that felt like a question and an answer intertwined. High notes shimmered lightly into the balconies. Low notes nestled themselves into the floorboards. When she finished, she lowered the instrument and listened. The hall did something she did not expect. It replied. Not loudly, not in full, but a short phrase of music, played in the same key in a similar tone, floated back to her. It was just a handful of notes. Beautiful, clear, not hers. Anna had the distinct sensation of someone saying, from very far away yet very close by, I hear you. She did not cry. She did not run. She simply smiled, tears stinging behind her eyes but not falling. Thank you, she whispered to the empty seats on her way out. She touched the side of the stage where Elena supposedly had rested her hand all those years ago. The wood was warm. Why she lingers. No one knows why the violinist stays, not with certainty. Some say the hall became her true home, the only place where music, silence, and breath aligned perfectly. Others say she could not bear for the building to feel empty after performances, so she decided to fill that absence herself. A more poetic explanation is sometimes shared over late-night coffee among musicians. She isn't stuck between worlds, they say. She just found a place where the veil between them is thin enough for her music to slip through. Whatever the reason, her presence is never a source of anxiety. If anything, the thought that someone plays for the hall when no one else does makes everyone who works there feel softer, more careful, more inclined to treat each rehearsal, each concert, each practiced phrase as part of a larger, ongoing conversation. Because if the violinist is listening, they want to make sure they uphold their side of the dialogue. A hall that sleeps to music. Some nights, when the wind rattles the high windows and the rain draws thin lines down the glass, the empty Vienna concert hall rests in perfect darkness. Then, somewhere in the center of the stage, a note hangs in the air. It hovers like a question. Then another meets it like an answer. The melody unfolds slowly, staying close, circling the same gentle phrases. It isn't trying to impress. It isn't trying to be remembered. It is only trying to exist for a little while, filling the space between one day and the next with something kind. By the time the last note fades into the wooden ribs of the building, the hall feels a little fuller, a little calmer, as though it has been tucked in beneath a blanket of sound. And when morning comes, cleaning staff open the doors, stagehands roll out risers, musicians unpack cases, and another day begins. They do not always hear her, but sometimes, in the way the air feels just before the first scale of the day, they sense it, the lingering trace of a melody played in the dark, by someone who never really left, for a hall that never truly sleeps. The whispering scholar of Alexandria. There are cities that remember loudly, cities where the past rises in stone blocks, where ruins shout their history against the sky. And then there is Alexandria, a city that remembers softly. Its history lives in its warm sea breeze, in the way gulls cry around the harbor, in the shadows of palm trees bending over ancient streets. Alexandria's memory is not carried in monuments, but in the spaces between them, in courtyards, in sunlit dust, in waves brushing the shore with endless patience. And somewhere within that gentle remembering, the story of the whispering scholar endures. A ghost, they say, but one who brings neither fear nor warning. He appears with a calmness shaped by centuries, carrying the scent of papyrus and sea air. He is not a haunting. He is a presence, a whisper of the ancient library of Alexandria, the library that refuses to disappear, the great library, more dream than building, more myth than record, was said to hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls. It housed astronomers, poets, physicians, mathematicians, philosophers. Its halls echoed with debate and rustling parchment. Lantern smoke curled against vaulted ceilings. When fire and war eventually consumed it, Alexandria mourned, not just for the knowledge lost, but for the minds who once tended it. But destruction, historians note, is never perfect. Something always remains. Sometimes it is ash. Sometimes it is memory. And sometimes it is a whisper. The first sightings. The earliest retellings of the Whispering Scholar come from sailors of the Mediterranean. They described a strange comfort they felt while approaching Alexandria's harbor at night. A sensation of being guided inward by a gentle awareness, as if someone from the shore was greeting them with silent hospitality. But the first recorded encounter belongs to a Coptic monk named Theophilus in the 8th century. He wrote, "While walking near the ancient foundations, I felt a presence beside me. He wore no face I could see, but I sensed a mind calm, patient, full of old light." The monk described hearing faint syllables, not in Greek or Coptic, but in something older, words that brushed his ears like wind over reeds. They did not frighten him. He wrote they were like the sound of thought trying to become sound. Who was the scholar? Over centuries, several theories emerged. 1. A librarian who stayed behind. Perhaps he was a keeper of scrolls who could not abandon the knowledge he spent his life organizing. Someone whose love for learning outweighs mortality. 2. A philosopher lost in thought. Some believe he was a thinker so absorbed in contemplation that even death could not interrupt his ongoing dialogue with the world. 3. A presence formed by knowledge itself. A more romantic interpretation. The library's collective wisdom, thousands of minds and lifetimes, condensed into a gentle consciousness that lingers in Alexandria's quiet places. Each theory carries a fragment of truth, but none describe the full picture. Because the Whispering Scholar is not an apparition tied to tragedy. His presence is not restless. It is serene. He feels like someone who simply never stopped thinking. The scholar's soft guidance. In modern Alexandria, archaeologists, university students, and night patrol guards speak of odd, yet comforting experiences around the site of the ancient library. A grad student's story. Yara, a graduate student researching Greco-Roman history, often stayed late in the new library of Alexandria. One night, as she walked across the plaza, her mind tangled in anxieties about her thesis, she felt someone fall into step beside her. Not with footsteps, with presence. Her heartbeat slowed, her breathing deepened. Her thoughts, frantic moments before, began arranging themselves like books finding the correct shelf. A quiet murmur brushed her ear. Not a voice, not words, something between, a suggestion of calm. By the time she reached the tram line, her panic had melted into clarity. Later she said, "It felt like someone was helping me think." An elderly guard's account. Farid, a security guard working near the archaeological zone, told a similar tale. He often walked the grounds at night, accompanied only by street cats and the hum of distant traffic. One evening, he felt a warm pressure on his shoulder, like a hand resting there gently. He turned. Nothing. But in the air, he sensed quiet companionship, as if an invisible scholar walked beside him, offering unspoken comfort. Farid began speaking aloud, sharing stories of his grandchildren, asking the empty air for advice. He never received words, only an easing sensation in his chest that felt like being heard. The scholar and the wind. Alexandria's wind behaves strangely around the ancient library's remains. Tour guides swear the breeze grows softer suddenly, as though muffled. Visitors claim it carries a faint scent of aged papyrus, though none exists anymore. And sometimes, when crowds disperse, the wind swirls upward in a spiral, as if lifting invisible pages. Locals call it the scholar breathing, not in a literal sense, but as a metaphor for the way presence fills the air. The poet's night walk. A modern poet named Salim told the story that shaped the current version of the legend. He loved walking along the corniche late at night, notebook in his pocket. When words refused to come to him, he wandered inland toward the plaza near the modern bibliotheca. One night, unable to form any poem longer than a single hesitant line, he sat on the stone steps overlooking the archaeological ruins. There the wind stilled. Silence expanded. Salim felt a mind brushing gently against his own. Not probing, not invading, simply aligning with him, like leaning two books together so they stopped falling. Without understanding why, he whispered, "What was it like when wisdom lived here openly?" For a moment he expected nothing. Then a warmth gathered around him. Something like a sigh moved through the plaza. Salim's own thoughts softened. Memories he didn't realize he had stored away drifted upward. Childhood afternoons reading beside his mother. His first glimpse of ancient calligraphy. The sound of waves against classroom windows. He took out his notebook and wrote without stopping. Later, he described it simply. It wasn't that he gave me words. It was that he cleared the clutter so my own words could breathe. Presence of order. People who experience the scholar often notice small, precise gestures. Tidy, scholarly habits. A notebook left open on a bench is found neatly closed. A bag full of loose papers is discovered perfectly arranged. A chalkboard erased before a new class begins, though no one touched it. A fallen bookmark sits upright, leaning against the spine of a book. The scholar, it seems, dislikes disorder. Not out of irritation, but because clarity matters. He is like a librarian straightening stacks. A teacher preparing a quiet room. A philosopher clearing the table before an idea arrives. The young tourist. One of the most touching encounters comes from a child, a young tourist from France. His parents found him sitting cross-legged in front of one of the shattered columns, smiling at nothing. When they approached, he whispered, "He's teaching me the names of stars." The parents, concerned, asked who he was. The boy pointed at the air beside him. "The quiet man with the books," he said, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. He traced tiny arcs in the air with his finger, naming constellations correctly. Names his parents knew he had never studied. When asked again what the man looked like, the boy shrugged. "I don't know. I only feel him. Why he stays." Most ghost stories revolve around unfinished business. But the whispering scholar does not linger out of regret. He is not waiting for a final scroll, a final student, a final truth. He stays because thought itself is endless. He stays because Alexandria, regardless of its transformations, has always been a city of minds, of people who think, question, write, debate, dream. The scholar's presence is not a disruption. It is a continuation. He is the echo of curiosity. The last whisper. A few years ago, a historian working late near the bibliotheca's entrance swore she heard something. Not a voice, not wind, but a shape of sound, like breath forming the beginning of a word. Not a warning, not a command, a greeting, a hello carried from centuries past. A whisper saying, "Keep going, because knowledge never ends, because curiosity never sleeps. Because some spirits are not tied to places, but to ideas, and ideas are immortal." Alexandria tonight. If you walk the plaza after midnight, when the city hum fades and the Mediterranean exhales softly against stone, you may sense him, a quiet awareness behind your shoulder, a warmth guiding your mind toward clarity, a whisper of thought that is not your own yet does not intrude. And if you leave with a calmer heart, a clearer mind, or a spark of inspiration you cannot explain, then perhaps the whispering scholar walked with you a while, not haunting, not lingering in sorrow, just thinking beside you. The candle keeper of Mont Saint-Michel. Mont Saint-Michel is a place where tides behave like stories. They rush in, retreat, reshape the land, and leave traces behind. Whispers in wet sand, ripples frozen in mud, pools reflecting the wandering sky. When the tide is high, the abbey rises like a dream above the water, an island fortress wrapped in mist. When the tide is low, sand stretches in every direction, glowing like bronze beneath the moon. It is a place that belongs to neither land nor sea, neither night nor day, neither the living nor the forgotten. And somewhere between those shifting boundaries, a gentle figure appears. A soft light, a steady glow. A presence locals call La Gardienne de Bougies, the candle keeper. A ghost, yes, but one who never frightens. If anything, she guides. The abbey that breathes with time. Mont Saint-Michel has always felt alive. Wind moves through its halls like breath. Waves speak against its stones in ancient rhythms. The abbey's steps, hundreds of them, echo with memories of pilgrims, monks, travelers, wanderers who climbed them searching for something. Solace, clarity, silence, belonging. In this place where tides swallow roads and reveal them again, the past never fully fades. It lingers like low fog softening edges, and the candle keeper is part of that lingering. Who was she? Her origins are unclear, woven through centuries of retellings. Some say she was a novice nun, quiet, devoted, responsible for keeping the abbey's candles burning during long nights of prayer. Others say she was an herbalist, who tended the sick and worked by lamplight late into the evening, brewing medicine in tiny stone chambers overlooking the sea. A few claim she was a lighthouse keeper's daughter, who lit lanterns along the causeway before the modern road existed, guiding travelers across dangerous sands. And some whisper she was none of these, that she is simply the memory of all the hands that ever lit candles here, fused into a single gentle presence. No matter the version, the description matches: a figure holding a small flame, moving slowly through corridors, never disturbing the air, only warming it. The painter's encounter. The most detailed account comes from a painter named Émile Laurent in the late 1800s. He spent a winter on Mont Saint-Michel, attempting to capture its shifting moods on canvas. Fog became his enemy and muse. It swallowed detail but revealed feeling. One cold night, he wandered into the abbey long after vespers. The monks had returned to their quarters. The torches were extinguished. The stone passages lay in near-total darkness. Émile brought a candle, but the flames struggled against drafts. Down a hallway he saw another light, a soft, unwavering glow. Relieved, he followed it. The figure carrying it was slim, wrapped in what looked like a simple robe. Her posture was calm, shoulders relaxed, steps light, gliding more than walking. She did not turn as he approached, but she seemed aware of him. Her light flickered once, not from wind, but like a nod. They descended a narrow stairway together. Émile's candle blew out, yet the hall remained illuminated by her glow. When they reached a stone landing overlooking the sea, she paused. He opened his mouth to thank her, but she lifted her candle slightly. The flame brightened, gentle warmth sliding across the walls, illuminating carvings Émile had never noticed. He drank in every detail, thinking only of how he would paint them the next morning. When he blinked, she was gone. No doorway, no footsteps, only the sound of the tide far below and the faint scent of warm wax. Émile returned to his room and painted until dawn. He described the experience in his journal. She was not a ghost of sorrow. She was a keeper of light. She guided me not to safety, but to clarity. Candles that should not burn. Even today, monks and caretakers report mysteries that feel more comforting than strange. The candles left unlit are found glowing softly in empty chapels. Lamps extinguish themselves a moment before a strong gust enters. Wax drips in perfect circles, as if shaped by a careful hand. Windows that rattle in the wind fall still when someone whispers a prayer. None of this frightens those who live or work there. Mont Saint-Michel is a place accustomed to miracles that look like coincidences. One monk said, "She tends to the small things. That is her devotion." The tidal walk. Perhaps the most widely known story of the Candlekeeper involves the tidal flats around the island. Before the modern causeway existed, travelers often became stranded when tides rose faster than expected. Even today, experienced guides warn that the sea can surge with startling speed, as swift as a galloping horse. The locals say, decades ago, a family walking the flats during twilight miscalculated the tide. Although the water was not yet dangerous, fog began to roll in, swallowing their path. Panic spread. The youngest child began to cry. Then they saw it. Not far away, moving through the fog, a warm point of light. Candle. Steady. Bright. Utterly unaffected by the wind. The figure holding it was barely visible, almost part of the mist itself. She moved calmly, pausing every few steps as though waiting for them to follow. The family approached. The mother described feeling an inexplicable wave of reassurance, like the warmth of being covered with a blanket fresh from the hearth. The candle keeper led them slowly, turning with elegant precision, navigating the safe ground as though she had walked it her whole life. When they reached the beginning of the stone causeway, the light lifted once, like a farewell. Then it dimmed gently into the fog. The child, comforted and sleepy on her father's shoulder, whispered, "She didn't want us to worry." A chef's midnight memory. Mont Saint-Michel is not only an abbey. It is a small village with inns, cafes, and restaurants whose kitchens never fully sleep. Cooks often work deep into the night, especially during tourist seasons. One chef, Jean-Luc, told a story he had kept secret for years. He stayed late preparing dough for the next morning's pastries. Rain beat against the window. His lantern flickered wildly, forcing him to stop kneading and steady it. Then the flame went out. He sighed, wiped his hands, and reached for a match. Before he struck it, the room brightened. Softly, warmly, like the first light of morning touching a stone floor. A figure stood in the doorway holding a candle that glowed with deep gold, gentle as honey. Her face was indistinct, but her presence felt like sincerity made visible. Jean-Luc did not feel fear. He only felt seen. The figure stepped forward and placed the candle on the counter beside him. The flame remained oddly still, regardless of the drafty kitchen. She turned, walked toward the wall, and faded before reaching it. The candle burned to the end of its wick that night but left no melted wax behind. Jean-Luc kept the candle holder. He still uses it today. The scholar of shadows. Researchers studying Mont Saint-Michel's history also encounter the candle keeper in more subtle ways. A Belgian historian named Margot visited to study medieval illumination practices, how monks once made pigments for manuscripts. While exploring the oldest scriptorium chambers at night, she lost track of time. Her flashlight dimmed, her notes scattered. A dip in the floor nearly toppled her. As she steadied herself, a soft sphere of light appeared at the far end of the room. Margot froze, the scholar in her wrestling with the impossibility. But the light didn't approach threateningly. It glided around the room's edges, revealing carvings and architectural details she would have otherwise missed. It paused before a stone niche. Margot followed and discovered faint traces of red pigment, the remains of a medieval workshop no textbook had ever referenced. Her research paper the next year thanked an anonymous guide who led me to an overlooked corner of history. Only Margot knows she meant it literally. Why she stays. Unlike spirits bound by sorrow, the candlekeeper's presence feels like continuity. She stays because the abbey still holds quiet corners. Candles still burn in prayer. Travelers still walk through fog needing gentle direction. And knowledge still flickers in small rooms lit by flame. She is not bound to Mont Saint-Michel. She is woven into it. Every warm light along a cold stone hall, every steady flame on a windy night, every candle that rescues someone from fear, feels like her, the final candle. A few years ago, a photographer captured an image during a stormy evening just outside the abbey. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the island and the rough surf crashing around it. When the photographer reviewed the pictures later, one image stood out. Inside a dark window of the abbey tower, a small flame glowed. Not white, not yellow, a deep, golden warmth. The same image zoomed in showed the flame clearly, but no wick, no candle, just a single point of light that seemed to hover in the air. Experts dismissed it as reflection. Locals smiled and said, "She likes to watch the storms." Tonight on Mont Saint-Michel, if you walk the abbey after sunset, when the tide muffles sound and the walls seem to inhale centuries, you may notice a small warmth near your shoulder, a faint glow in the corner of your eye, a candle flame moving ahead of you, lighting difficult steps, illuminating the way to the next landing. If you stop, the flame pauses. If you breathe deeply, it steadies. If you whisper merci, some say it brightens. And when it disappears, the air around you will feel lighter, as though someone quietly ensured your safe passage, and continued on to help the next traveler. Not haunting, not warning, not lingering in sorrow, just holding up a little light for anyone walking through the dark. The garden walker of Córdoba's mezquita. Night falls differently in Córdoba. Some cities darken all at once, like a curtain being pulled across the sky. But Córdoba softens into night. Orange blossoms release their perfume into the cooling air. The Guadalquivir River breathes mist upward from its ancient bridges. Stone streets warm from the day begin to glow faintly, holding on to sunlight as long as they can. And the mezquita, the great mosque cathedral with its forest of red and white arches, changes with the dusk more than any other place in the city. By day it is magnificent, arches multiplying until they seem infinite, columns rising like a stone grove, light filtering through centuries of history layered upon one another. By night, it becomes quiet, sacred, dimly alive, and in those hours, beneath the arches and through the orange tree courtyards, a gentle presence moves. The locals call him El Caminante del Jardín, the garden walker, a spirit of peace, not fear, a companion of the night, a silent guardian of an ancient courtyard that remembers every footstep ever taken within it. A courtyard full of breathing trees. The Patio de los Naranjos is one of Córdoba's oldest living spaces. A courtyard planted with rows of orange trees, their leaves whispering with each passing breeze. At night, the courtyard smells of citrus and stone. A fountain trickles with water that has flowed through the same channels for over 1,000 years. The cobblestones hold warmth long after sunset, radiating it softly upward like the breath of sleeping earth. It is here, among the trees, that the garden walker is often seen. Not clearly, not fully, not as a figure with shape and detail, but as a suggestion. A man walking slowly between the rows of trees, hands clasped gently behind his back, as though he is meditating on the murmurs of the leaves. He never turns, he never approaches. He never intrudes. He simply walks, tracing patterns older than the building itself. Origins in whispered stories. Many believe the garden walker was once a scholar during the golden age of Al-Andalus, when Córdoba was a center of learning, poetry, astronomy, and philosophy. In those days, the courtyard served not only as a place of cleansing before prayer, but as a gathering space for thinkers who debated softly in small groups, their voices mingling with the rustling branches. Scholars say he might have been a philosopher who loved to walk among the trees while forming ideas, a calligrapher who came to rest his eyes between hours of delicate work, a teacher who lectured under the shade of the orange branches, or simply someone who found peace in the courtyard's rhythm. Regardless of his past, the stories agree. He returns only to walk, not to haunt, not to warn, but to continue a habit that outlived his mortal years. The Night of the Architect. A modern architect named Isabel Rodriguez encountered him while studying the mezquita's interplay of light and geometry. Permission had been granted for her to wander after hours, observing how the arches shaped shadow. Past midnight, she stepped into the courtyard to breathe fresh air before continuing her sketches. The night was still. The moon hung low, turning the stone fountains silver. Then she saw movement, a shadow drifting along the far row of orange trees. Not sudden, not threatening, just present. The figure walked slowly, head angled slightly upward as though admiring the shapes of the branches. Isabel felt no fear. Instead, she felt companionship, like meeting someone who shared an unspoken appreciation for the place. She whispered softly, "Es bello, verdad? It's beautiful, isn't it?" She did not expect an answer, and none came, but the leaves in the nearest tree trembled gently. Though no wind moved, the figure continued until it reached the end of the row, paused, and faded in the same direction a real person would have turned to exit. Isabel returned indoors with a strange sense of gratitude. He made the courtyard feel awake. she said later. A night guard's memory. Cordoba's mezquita has night guards who patrol the grounds with slow, deliberate steps, ensuring everything remains peaceful. One of them, a man named Mateo, had an experience he shared reluctantly, only after many years. During one quiet shift, while checking the courtyard, he felt someone walking beside him. Not close enough to alarm him, just close enough to accompany. His footsteps had an echo, a second sound layered behind his own, slightly delayed, like two rhythms gently converging. When he stopped, the echo stopped. When he continued, it followed. Mateo knew the stories, yet he did not feel watched in a threatening way. He felt seen but kindly. He completed the full circuit of the courtyard with this unseen presence at his side. When he reached the final archway, he paused. The echo faded. Mateo whispered into the darkness. "Gracias por caminar conmigo." Thank you for walking with me. The night answered only with orange blossoms releasing their fragrance. The historian and the page that turned itself. A visiting historian from Morocco, Amina Al-Yassiri, spent months studying the mezquita's layers of history. She often worked late in the courtyard during summer evenings, enjoying the cooler air. One night, she fell asleep over her notes beneath a tree. When she awoke, the sky was dark, and the courtyard was empty. Her manuscript lay open in her lap. But something had changed. Her bookmark, a dried orange leaf, had moved to a later page. Amina frowned, confused, thinking she must have done it in her sleep. But she distinctly remembered marking the earlier section. Before she could overthink it, she felt the faintest brush of warm air above her shoulder. Not wind, something intentional. She lifted her head and saw between the trees a soft silhouette drifting past, its pace measured, its posture serene. Amina did not chase it. She simply whispered, "Shukran." Later she realized the page she had been moved to was exactly the section she needed to reference for her next chapter. The orange blossom path. Many tourists walk through the courtyard without ever knowing its nightly secret. But those who come at dusk or dawn sometimes notice something unusual. A path of fallen orange blossoms arranged in a gentle curve, leading from one archway to another. Monks and caretakers swear they sweep the courtyard thoroughly, yet the blossom paths appear without explanation. Always curved, always peaceful, as though someone strolls the courtyard, brushing the branches lightly with his fingertips as he goes. Some mornings, people find two parallel paths, suggesting two walkers walk side by side. One path faint and light, the other barely visible yet somehow present. Visitors who see them often feel strangely calm afterward, as if they have glimpsed the residue of a quiet companionship. The traveler lost in thought. A traveler from Argentina, named Martín, wandered into the mezquita late one evening during a cultural night event. He had been carrying the weight of personal worries, family conflict, work uncertainty, restlessness he couldn't explain. Overwhelmed, he escaped into the courtyard. There, he saw a figure strolling among the trees, head bowed slightly, steps slow and meditative. First, Martín thought he had intruded on someone else's private moment and began to turn away. But the figure stopped, turned not fully, just enough to acknowledge him, and then resumed walking, an invitation without words. Martín followed several paces behind. He didn't speak. The figure did not look back again. But Martín felt something loosen in his chest. By the time they reached the far fountain, Martín found himself breathing freely for the first time in weeks. He looked up, meaning to thank the quiet companion. There was no one there, but a fresh orange blossom floated on the fountain's water, despite no wind and no fallen flowers nearby. Martín cupped the blossom gently and allowed himself to feel at peace. Why he stays. Spirits who remain in the world often do so because a something unsettled binds them, or tragedy anchors them, or longing refuses to fade. But the garden walker defies these patterns. He stays because the courtyard is still beautiful, people still seek quiet there, minds still wander beneath the branches, and hearts still need gentle presence. He stays because walking was his way of thinking, and thinking was his way of living, and living, for him, was never entirely separate from the courtyard. The mezquita breathes memory, and he breathes with it. Tonight in the patio de los Naranjos, if you walk the courtyard after dusk, when the arches hold shadows, like folded wings, and the fountains murmur, like monks at prayer, and the orange trees rustle, with ancient perfume, you may sense him, not see, sense. A presence moving in a line that has been traced for centuries. Soft footfalls not heard but felt. A mind walking near yours, steady and thoughtful. A silence that comforts rather than chills. And if you stand still long enough, you may notice blossoms at your feet, not fallen, but placed, as though someone paused beside you, and in that pause, offered peace, not haunting, not warning, not asking to be seen, just walking, as he always has, as he always will, the hearth keeper of the Highland Castle. The Scottish Highlands do not grow quiet at night. They soften. The heather darkens from purple to charcoal. Locks turn into sheets of ink, holding moonlight in long, trembling lines. Winds that roamed loudly across the hills all day settle into a gentler pace, brushing past stones and grasses as if whispering good night to each of them in turn. On one such hill, overlooking a valley that has seen more winters than anyone can count, stands an old stone castle. Not one of the grand, polished castles that end up on postcards, but a smaller, sturdier one. Thick walls, narrow windows, and a great hall centered around an enormous hearth. By day, the castle belongs to caretakers, visitors, historians, and tour groups. By night, when the last door is locked and the lights go out, it belongs to her. They call her the hearth keeper, a quiet, gentle spirit who lingers not in the shadows of corridors or the echoes of dungeons, but by warmth, where the embers glow, where the stone remembers heat, where people once gathered close to feel safe from the dark. A castle built around a fire. The castle was raised centuries ago by a clan chief who understood that a home, no matter how fortified, was only truly secure if its fire never went out. So he had a grand hearth built first, wide enough to stand inside, high enough that smoke drifted cleanly up into the chimney and out into the highland sky. Around that hearth the great hall grew. Around that hall rooms and chambers. Around those walls and battlements. The fire came first. Everything else followed. For generations people gathered there. Warriors returning from long rides. Children listening to winter tales. Elders mending tools and telling stories. Guests who had traveled days through snow and rain. No matter who you were, if you were allowed inside, the hearth greeted you. Its warmth was a promise. You are safe here for the night. Among those who tended the fire, one woman was remembered more than any other. Her name in most retellings is Mary. Mary who knew how to listen. Mary was not a noblewoman. She had no title, no lands, no lineage of note. But she held something more precious in the long winter months. She knew how to keep the hearth alive. She understood the way peat smoldered, how logs should be stacked to breathe, how to coax flame into lasting embers that would not die even when everyone went to sleep. More importantly, she understood that people, like fires, needed air, space, and patience. At night, when the great hall emptied and soft snores drifted from the nearby bunk rooms, she would sit in a worn wooden chair by the hearth with a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the fire slowly settle. Sometimes she dozed there. Sometimes she hummed old songs with no words. Sometimes she simply sat in silence, listening to the crackle and soft fall of ash. If anyone woke troubled from a nightmare or came in from a late ride with worry stamped across their face, they would find her there. She did not bombard them with questions. She would pat the bench beside her, offer a mug of something warm, and let the fire do most of the talking. People poured out their troubles at that hearth. Fears of war, grief for lost family, confessions of doubt, whispers of secrets they could not say in daylight. Mary listened. Her responses were rarely grand or poetic. A gentle nod, a simple phrase, "It will pass, love," or "You are not alone," or "Let's sit a while." But when they finally stood to return to bed, almost everyone felt lighter. It was said that if Mary had sat beside the hearth with someone long enough, They never left feeling as cold as when they came. She grew old doing this. Old enough that no one remembered a time she hadn't been there. When she died, it was in the same chair, shawl wrapped around her, eyes closed, the fire steady beside her. Someone later swore they saw the embers glow brighter for a moment, as if saying farewell. Embers that refused to die. Nothing supernatural happened at once. Life went on. New caretakers tended the hearth. New visitors warmed their hands at the same stones. But slowly, people began to notice small, gentle oddities. On winter nights, when the last person left the hall and swore they had smothered the fire completely, a faint glow would remain. One coal brighter than the others, tucked against the backstone, breathing slowly in red-orange. By morning, that coal often turned into a soft rekindled heat, making it unusually easy to start the new day's fire. When the castle became less of a stronghold and more of a historic site, staff sometimes forgot logs stacked too close to the fireplace. Yet none ever tumbled in dangerously. They'd shift, but only enough to settle into a safer position, as if nudged by a cautious hand. A modern caretaker once said, "It's as if someone is still fussing over the hearth, making sure it behaves itself." The visitor who couldn't sleep. One story, often retold to guests staying overnight, involves a young woman named Harriet who booked a room in the castle when it was converted into a small inn and heritage retreat. She arrived at the tail end of autumn, when the wind carried the bite of approaching snow. Her life in the city had frayed her nerves thin. Too much noise, too many demands, not enough quiet. She convinced herself that a few nights in a stone castle under a highland sky would fix everything. But quiet can be unnerving to those unused to it. That first night, Harriet lay in bed unable to sleep. The silence felt heavy, pressing against her ears. Every creak of the old wood, every sigh of wind through the stones made her heart beat faster. Finally, she slipped on her slippers and went down to the great hall, thinking she might find someone awake or at least distract herself by sitting where so many others had sat before. The hall was empty. The hearth should have been dark. Yet embers glowed faintly, casting a low, comforting light across the floor. A single armchair sat pulled a little closer to the fire, angled perfectly toward its warmth. Harriet felt an odd sense of welcome. She approached cautiously, then sat. A wool blanket, neatly folded on the chair's arm, slipped into her lap as if someone had placed it there for her. She draped it over her legs and stared into the embers. The longer she watched, the slower her breathing became. Her shoulders loosened. Thoughts that had raced all day simply softened, like snow melting at the edge of a flame. She did not hear a voice. She did not see a figure. But she felt watched in the gentlest sense, like a grandmother sitting nearby, making sure she was warm enough. After a while, her eyelids grew heavy. She stood, gently folded the blanket back over the arm of the chair, whispered "thank you" to the quiet room, and returned to bed. That night, she slept without waking once. The child and the blanket. Another story comes from a family who stayed at the castle during a particularly harsh winter. Their young son, Jamie, was frightened of storms. Thunder made him cry. The howl of wind rattling old windows made him curl into a ball. When snow began to beat against the stone walls and the fields outside vanished into white, he could not relax enough to fall asleep. His parents tried singing, reading, promising stories the next day. Nothing helped. Finally, his mother offered to take him downstairs, thinking the fire might soothe him. They found the great hall nearly empty, the flames low but still alive, licking slowly at the last of the logs. Jamie climbed onto a bench with his mother beside him. He stared at the fire, clutching a stuffed toy in small hands. Then he noticed something. A shawl lay folded on the back of a nearby chair, a woolen wrap that none of them had seen earlier. It looked hand-woven, with simple patterns worked into the fabric, faintly smelling of lavender and smoke. Jamie's mother hadn't brought it. None of the staff claimed it. Without quite knowing why, she wrapped it around his shoulders. Immediately, he relaxed. His small body, tense for hours, softened as he leaned into her side, the shawl holding warmth around him like an embrace. Within minutes, His breathing slowed into the unmistakable rhythm of sleep. They returned the shawl to the chair before going back to their room. In the morning, the shawl was gone. A caretaker, when asked, only smiled gently and said, "She must have thought he looked cold." A flame that calms the air. People who work late in the castle remark often on a peculiar phenomenon. The fire seems to respond not to the wind or the stack of logs, but to emotion. On days when tour groups argue loudly or people pass through the hall in a rush, the flames crackle more wildly, sparks jumping higher than expected. On evenings when someone sits in front of the hearth in quiet reflection, the fire burns low and steady, almost breathing in time with them. One guide, who often reads near the fireplace after hours, swears that when she reaches a particularly sad passage in a book, the flames lean in, not brighter, not hotter, just more attentive. "It feels like the room is listening," she says. And always, if someone lingers alone, feeling overwhelmed or restless, a chair closest to the fire seems to shift slightly, angled more invitingly, as though nudged by an unseen hand. The historian's night. A historian studying domestic life in medieval castles arranged to spend a night in the Great Hall to observe how the space felt at different hours. He lay on a simple makeshift bedroll, notebook by his side, the fire burning down to coals. The huge room loomed above him, the ceiling lost in shadow. Banners hung from the walls, swaying slightly with the draft. The historian, accustomed to libraries and lecture halls, felt unexpectedly small beneath the stone arches. He found his mind racing with questions. What if the fire went out? What if the cold became too intense? What if being completely alone in such an old place tugged at his nerves more than he anticipated? As if in response, the embers brightened. No one added wood. No bellows stirred air into the coals. The glow deepened, shadows softening to a warm amber. The air around him gained a gentle warmth, as though someone had placed a hand on the stone just behind his head, sharing heat. He watched, fascinated, as the ember bed seemed to rearrange itself. Tiny collapses of charcoal produced new channels for air. Small collapses formed glowing shapes that reminded him of cupped hands. He laughed quietly at his own imagination. Yet the comfort was real. He wrote in his notebook, "The castle possesses a presence of care. If there is a ghost here, she is a hostess. Why she stays? Some ghosts remain because they are tethered by pain. Others linger because they fear what comes next. Still others are trapped by stories told about them, unable to move beyond the role they've been given. The hearthkeeper does not seem to fit any of these. She stays, it seems, because the hearth still burns. People still sit around it looking for comfort. The stone still remembers voices and laughter, and the night still makes some hearts tremble. She was, in life, a watcher of fires and a listener of worries. In spirit, nothing has changed. She does not rattle armor or parade through hallways. She does not appear in mirrors or cast sudden cold. Her presence is felt in a log that rolls safely into place instead of falling, a stubborn fire that refuses to die when someone needs its light, a chair angled perfectly to catch the warmth, a blanket appearing right when someone shivers. She is not there to remind anyone of death. She is there to make the living feel less alone in the dark. The hearth tonight. If you ever find yourself in an old castle in the Highlands, seated before a wide stone fireplace while wind howls softly outside and snow taps against centuries-old glass, you might feel it. The subtle sense that the fire is more than flame, that the warmth carries affection, that the light feels almost like a hand on your shoulder. You may notice a chair that seems to await you specifically. You may find a shawl or blanket left just where you will see it. You may watch an ember brighten as your thoughts grow heavy, as if in gentle solidarity. And if you whisper "thank you" into the room, and the fire flares softly in response, take comfort in the thought that someone, somewhere between history and memory, heard you. Not a haunting, not a warning, not a restless spirit pacing stone floors. Just a hearthkeeper, still tending the fire, still watching over the night, still making sure that, in this old place, no one has to feel cold and alone. while the dark passes quietly by.